So everybody, the iPhone 15 seems to be getting nearer and nearer, and 9 to 5 Mac was actually able to get some exclusive CAD renders, which is the CAD files that manufacturers and case manufacturers use to figure out where the button placement is going to be like, how big the camera bump is going to be, and things like that, so they can pre-make cases and have them ready to be actually sold once the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro lineup does release. So in this video, our very own Ian Zelbo put together some amazing renders that I want to show off, and also I want to mention some of the things that we are expecting with the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro lineup. So without further ado, let's get into this video, everybody. Okay, so let's first talk about the design of the new iPhone 15 Pro lineup, and that's what we're going to be talking about mostly in this video, the 15 Pro, and not the regular 15 and the 15 Plus, but it does seem like Apple's going to double down with their 15 and 15 Plus instead of going back to like a 15 mini, which, you know, we love over here with the 13 mini. But with the 15 Pro, the first thing that we're going to notice is that it's going to be a brand new finish, and the idea is for it to be a titanium finish. And another thing to take note about when it comes to the design of the iPhone, Apple did go to this new industrial design adoption with the iPhone 12, then the 13, and the 14. And while most people did actually like that change compared to what we always used to have, kind of those very rounded edges and a little bit of a thinner iPhone, it does make it a little bit harder on the hands, especially with the sharper edges. So I think what Apple's going to do is, with this titanium casing, they're actually going to round the edges a little bit more to make it a little bit more comfortable to hold in the hand, which means it probably won't be able to stand on its own 100% of the time, because I know some people like that about these very flat edges. So imagine the edges to be very flat, but instead of having this kind of 90-degree cutoff from the screen to the side railing, it's going to be more of a rounded edge with still flat sides. So in my opinion, it's going to be kind of best of both worlds. If you like the rounded edges because it was a little bit more comfortable with the older iPhones like the 11 and older, but if you also like the design, the new industrial design of the 12 and newer iPhones, this is going to be a match made in heaven for that person, which I am one of those people. So now the next thing I want to talk about is the camera system on these new iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, because, you know, whether you love it or you hate it, these cameras are going to get even bigger. Now, I thought that the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max cameras were already big enough with the new 48 megapixel sensor, but these cameras on the 15 Pro and Pro Max are going to be even bigger. So if you're kind of annoyed by how big these cameras are getting, then you might have to stick with one of the older ones, but it is for good reason overall. The first thing we're noticing is that it's going to be thicker. So from a thickness standpoint, the lens is actually going to protrude even twice as much more than it did on the 14 and even 4 times more than it did on the 13. So I remember when I got the 13 Pro Max, I thought those camera lenses compared to the 12 were like, whoa, this triple camera array is going to be crazy. Then I thought the same thing with the 14, and we're going to think the same exact thing with the 15, especially if you go with the 15 Pro, because the camera's going to be so big on that 15 Pro with that smaller footprint of the 15 Pro that it could look a little bit funny. One thing to note is that with the 15 Pro Max, the actual thickness of those lenses is a little bit smaller than the thickness on the 15 Pro, and we're actually thinking that that is going to be the case because there is a rumored periscope camera to allow for a more optical zoom, maybe a 10x or a 20x optical zoom to compete with whatever Samsung is doing. But that is also going to allow the camera lenses to be a little bit more shallow compared to the thicker versions of the 15 Pro, which will not have a periscope lens, and that is what we think is the reasoning for the thicker camera. And then another improvement that this could actually indicate is that low light performance is going to get a big boost compared to what we had last year and the year before. Even though night mode shots, for the most part, they're pretty decent and they get pretty crisp, some people still complain, especially compared to other phones in the Android world, that Apple, from a low light performance standpoint, unless you go into that night mode, that the low light performance isn't that great. So with the bigger lenses, more light should be allowed to come in, faster shutter speeds, and we should be able to get a much better picture overall. So now let's continue to talk about the railing of the iPhone, and it's looking more and more certain that the iPhone 15 is going to be the first iPhone lineup to go USB-C across the entire lineup. Based on the leak imagery of prototype devices, the USB-C port has a unique metal surrounding with a ribbed texture, so it's going to be a little bit different compared to the Lightning cable, and that's why we're able to kind of almost confirm 100% that the USB-C will be coming to iPhone, which I'm all for. And again, it's going to be USB-C. Maybe Apple will put Thunderbolt on the 15 Pro Max for faster transfer speeds, especially with the 48 megapixel camera, with the raw images, 250 megabytes per file size. So Thunderbolt could be a much faster way of moving stuff from your iPhone to your computer or to your iPad. But for now, it's USB-C all things. But one thing to take note is that this could allow for even faster wire charging, but if you want to get the full fast wire charging, you're going to have to go directly from Apple to get the power brick and the cable itself. Third-party cables, kind of like MagSafe right now. So MagSafe compatible accessories will only charge your iPhone at 7.5 watts versus MagSafe certified accessories will charge your iPhone at 15 watts. The same thing is going to happen with the USB-C cable, right? Any USB-C cable will for sure be able to charge your iPhone, but only the fastest charging will be saved for Apple accessories. And now it looks like Apple's actually moving away from physical buttons. And, we saw this writing on the wall ever since Apple kind of replaced their trackpad with one pane of glass and made the haptic feedback kind of your click feedback overall. And Apple has been perfecting haptics for a very long time. And in my opinion, haptics on the iPhone, compared to any other phone on the market, iPhones kind of take the cake. The haptic feedback is so crisp, it almost makes it feel like you're actually pressing down on a button. So what Apple's going to be doing is that instead of having a volume up and volume down, Apple's replacing that with one single elongated button that's going to actually give you feedback haptically. So the button is physically not going to move, but you'll be able to press it and feel like it is moving overall. And then also, I know a lot of people are going to get upset about this, but if you really think about it, how often do you actually flip this switch? It's always been very nice to have that silence switch overall and that vibrate switch, but for the most part, I rarely ever touch it. I kind of set it and forget it, but Apple's actually moving this to be another haptic feedback or capacitive button. So it's going to be one actual just push down button for quote unquote, but it's not actually going to move. And then the haptic feedback is going to be what's actually going to trigger, whether you want to set it to vibrate or not. But then Apple's also going to be able to kind of change what it does via software. So maybe if you're on your home screen and you press it, it's going to turn it to a vibrate into a silence. But maybe let's say you're in the camera app, right? And you want to use a shutter button, that could be your shutter button. Or maybe you're in your stopwatch app and you want to actually press that button to make it start and stop. So Apple will have some leeway on what they want to do from a software perspective with that piece of hardware, but I think that's going to fully replace the vibrate and the silence kind of switcher that we've always had pretty much since the very, very beginning. And then finally, one more thing with the design on the actual screen itself. So we do suspect that the dynamic island could be coming to all of the iPhones across the entire board, including the lower level iPhone 15. Except for the screen technology, it's still going to be 60 Hz on the regular iPhones and 120 ProMotion OLED displays on the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. But another thing to consider is that the bezels will actually get even smaller on this iPhone. So the new thickness of this bezel is going to be 1.55 millimeters, which I think is about half the size of what it is right now. So if you measure the bezels on your 14 Pro Max or your 13 Pro Max, it's going to be ever so slightly bigger than it's going to be on the 15 Pro Max. And then also from the CAD files that we learned, there's going to be a slight, and I mean a very, very slight curve on the outside of the edge, so it kind of seamlessly goes into that new titanium railing that we're going to give the iPhone. Now, I'm personally not a big fan of waterfall displays. Samsung, when they made it, wasn't a big fan. Some manufacturers have made that waterfall display a little bit less waterfally, but I think Apple's going to be able to implement it nicely because it's still going to be a flat display. It's just going to curve ever so slightly to make it more comfortable in the hand, so you're not kind of like stabbing yourself with a hard right angle inside of your palm or on your fingers. And then of course, with the Pro and Pro Max lineup, every year we get a brand new color, right? I think with the iPhone 12 it was Sierra Blue or Pacific Blue. Comment down below to really confirm that one. And then the 13 Pro had the other one, so it was either Sierra or Pacific Blue. But then we had the deep purple, which everybody seemed to fall in love with the 14 Pro and Pro Max. And this year, we're gonna get this new like deep red maroonish color, which I used to love all the product red iPhones that Apple would release kind of mid-cycle way back in the day, but that was like a very punchy red. This one's gonna be a little bit more subtle. Apple likes to have their Pro colors and be a lot more subtle than they really are. So if you're going with the gold, it's always gonna be like a light champagne gold. This is probably gonna be the same thing where it's gonna be clearly red, but it's gonna be kind of a darker, less intense red than we're used to with the product red lineup. And then the last thing that we have from these CAD files is that the iPhone size is going to be a little bit different. So when we went from the 13 to the 14 Pro Max, the actual footprint of the iPhone and the thickness of the iPhone was the same, to the point where you can kind of almost use the same case aside from the camera bumps. But if you had, let's say, an iPhone 13 and you upgraded to a 14, you could still use your iPhone 13 cases with your iPhone 14 because those were actually identical. But now with the 15 Pro and the 15 Pro Max, the size is actually going to be a little bit different. So because the bezels are shrinking, so is the footprint of each phone by the slightest bit. So we're actually shrinking about 1 millimeter in length and width overall from the 14 to the 15 Pro. And then from a thickness standpoint, it's actually going to increase by about 0.5 millimeter. So it's going to get a tiny bit thicker and a little bit smaller of a footprint. Nothing that you're going to probably be able to tell the difference unless you hold them side by side. But that's something to take into consideration because probably means that your cases from last year will not work with the new iPhone this year. But that is everything we have with the new iPhone. So we have a new kind of subtle change in the design, a new color, USB-C is finally coming, a bigger camera bump for better photos, because now we live in a world where everybody wants to have the latest and greatest camera sensor because they like to share what they're doing pretty much at all times. But overall, I think this is going to be a great upgrade for the iPhone lineup. I'm somebody that for the most part likes to go every 2 years for the personal phone, so it's going to be a nice upgrade. If you're coming from the 14, let's see what Apple does overall. There still could be a case to actually upgrade from a 14 to a 15, and in my opinion, it's purely because of that USB-C cable. That USB-C implementation on the iPhone is going to change the perspective of what the iPhone can do for a lot of people. I even think Apple could bring a competitor to DeX on the new iPhone 15 Pro Max. Maybe that's what Stage Manager is. Stage Manager was made on the iPad to try it out, but maybe there's a world where you plug in your new iPhone with a USB-C cable, plug it into a monitor, and all of a sudden now you have floating windows that you can actually play around with overall, so you can have a bigger kind of canvas to work with on your iPhone, because that A17 Bionic chip is going to be more than powerful enough to run something like Stage Manager. But let me know in the comment down below what you think. What are you excited for with this new iPhone? Are you going to get it? Are you planning on upgrading? What iPhone are you coming from if you will be upgrading? And let me know what you think is going to excite you the most and what the newest use case is going to be for you. I'm excited to see what Apple does with the new Vibrate haptic switch, or whatever they do with that, and I'm going to see what Apple does with iOS 17, because iOS 17 will foreshadow a lot of what we're going to be able to do on the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. But that's going to do it, everybody. If you made it to the end, leave a dolphin in the comments down below, and also shout out to Ian for putting these renders together. I know he worked extremely hard. He's the absolute man. But if you guys want to watch more macOS, iOS, or iPadOS videos, click on one of these right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando, and I'm out of here, everybody. Peace.